Good evening, and thank you for coming out tonight to the East Hampton Library for tonight's event. We'd like to thank everybody at home for zooming in tonight to this evening's lecture, The Science of Science Fiction, presented by Dr. Fred Walter. I just would like to say every last Wednesday of the month, we've had a science fiction book group here at the East Hampton Library, and it's been in moving along since 2011. About 6 years ago, we branched out, offering it hybrid over Zoom, and now we have some individuals from other parts of the world. So we are now a worldwide sci-fi book club. And a little bit about Dr. Walter before we begin. Dr. Fred Walter is an observational astronomer. He was a professor of astronomy at Stony Brook University since 1989 and has been professor emeritus since December of 2025. He has a Bachelor of Science in Physics from MIT, received his PhD in astronomy from the University of California at Berkeley, and spent 8 years as a postdoc at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And without further ado, I'd like to turn over tonight's discussion to Dr. Fred Walter.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. I normally get 42 hours a whole semester to talk about science fiction to students. So I was sort of, it was hard to try to figure out what to say in 45, 50 minutes. So I hope this doesn't disappoint any of you. And I will certainly take questions if you think I'm going off track. An important thing is to find out who the audience is. You're all readers of science fiction, I presume, which is unlike the students who take my science fiction class. So you know something about what I'm hopefully going to be talking about. So I want to know, why do you read science fiction? By the way, I'm going to focus on reading and books because I prefer to read the books to watching the movies. My students all prefer the movies, so there's a bit of a disconnect there. But I want to know why you like science fiction. Is it because it's escapist? I don't know when this woodcut comes from, but clearly that's somebody escaping the planet. Early thoughts of science fiction. Is it because you believe in brave new worlds and world building and utopias? Nobody's raised their hands yet. Is it because you like thinking about aliens? Here's a bunch of aliens to choose from. Some better than others. Is it because you're just impatient for the future to arrive and you long for spaceships? You pine for spaceships and exploring the universe and meeting aliens? There are probably other reasons to read science fiction, but those are some I found good pictures for, or at least pictures for. So I want to start by sort of trying to define what science fiction is. We'll get into science-y bits later. So the fonts have changed. So what is science fiction? I'm going to ask you a question. The answer is up there, so you don't get it wrong. Is it fiction about science? And the answer is no, because science is annoyingly predictable. There's very little tension in science, unless you're looking for something new, something nobody's ever found before. But people don't write fiction about that, except in terms of scientific proposals. This is not fiction about science. Usually, well, I'll take that back. There is an exception. Jules Verne wrote about science and engineering with very little character development. You can call Jules Verne a real science science fiction author. More so to the point, it's fiction that employs science and technology as an important part of the story. There's lots of fiction. Go upstairs and look at all the books. There's lots of fiction that never mentions anything scientific or technological. That's not science fiction. But if science has an important role to play, and it does not mean exploring outer space. Science happens other places too. Technology happens other places too. That's also science fiction. For example, how many of you have read The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton? His first story. That's biochemistry. Without that biochemistry, there's no story there. Carl Sagan's Contact. Everybody's read that. You've seen the movie. A lot of science behind that. The science of communicating with aliens drives that. And you've all seen The Martian or read the book. I'm sure you've seen the movie. That's very scientific. It's got some flaws, but the science is what drives it. Of course, the character is quite interesting too. So anyways, good literature, as opposed to bad literature, tends to focus on human beings, or at least intelligent aliens or something that's thinking, because you want to have tension. You want to have something capricious in the story. And I hate sounding like an English professor because I'm not one, but these are important things in stories. Science and technology by themselves are sort of dull and boring, usually. So, Ray Bradbury wrote that science fiction is a depiction of the real. Now, you may question that because a lot of science fiction authors are using their imaginations. It's taking place in the far distant future in weird places, but it's things that are plausible or possible. So it's the fiction of the real. And I'm going to break this down into three subgenres. This speculative fiction, I think this is a better term. We all use the term SF. S stands for both speculative and science. Speculative fiction starts in our present reality. It may involve science, it may not. And there's a book I'll mention later that is very much speculative fiction starts in our reality, but there's very little science in it. Alternative histories, if you like reading alternate histories, they're speculative fiction too. They all ask, what happens if something is different? Space opera, Star Wars, Star Trek. Star Trek has a little bit of science, pseudoscience in it. But space opera is what gets a lot of people into science fiction. It just takes place somewhere else, far off in the future. It may or may not be believable. It may not have science in it, but it's considered science fiction. What I tend to focus on is what's called hard science fiction. And hard doesn't mean difficult. Hard science fiction is opposed to soft science fiction, which, is not hard. Soft science fiction, you can make up more things. Hard science fiction, you want some plausibility. You want some, there's a legal term, plausible deniability, or the opposite thereof. Anyways, David Brin, whose name fell off the bottom, wrote that science fiction is merely a historical novel that hasn't happened yet. It's been written about, but it hasn't happened yet. So, science fiction, you think well of yourselves for liking science fiction. It's a literature of dreams, of hopes, of aspirations. It's what we want to be. It's not what we are. It's what we want to be, unless you really like dystopian stuff. It's a literature of ideas, and more so than characters. There are some good science fiction stories that do have good characters and good character development, but it's still a literature of ideas. And that's important because ideas can be subversive. Science fiction is dangerous. It's, to certain people anyways. It's a literature that's expansive. It plays out in the whole universe. You're not confined to some little corner of planet Earth. It could be anywhere in the universe. So you've got a lot of latitude here, and you can explore things that are hard to do in regular literature. Now, fantasy always comes up. Students say, what about this or that, or Star Wars, science fiction, or fantasy? It's more fantasy than anything else. At least that's my opinion. You may differ, and feel free to differ. But according to Ray Bradbury, fantasy is the depiction of the unreal. It's implausible. Science fiction is plausible. It may not have happened yet, but it's plausible, whereas fantasy, forget about it. Game of Thrones is fantasy. Fantasy often happens in the past. For some reason, we love medieval times. It's a great place to have dragons, right? Anyways, magic has no place in science fiction. You've probably all heard of Arthur C. Clarke's admonition that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So you can certainly put things into your book that certainly seem magical, but there might be something plausible behind it. Fantasy likes having dragons flying through the air, breathing fire. It's possible to devise a biology where dragons breathe fire and can somehow fly. It's been done. I think Marion Zimmer Bradley did it. So you can do that. But you've got to be careful how you do it. Now, you probably know, you've heard people say, why do you read science fiction? It's not important, it doesn't do anything, it's not real literature. There's a wonderful essay you can find online that Kurt Vonnegut wrote back in 1965 called On Writing Science Fiction. It was published in the New York Times. And when you read it a couple of times, you realize that he hasn't gotten over the fact that some critics panned his book, The Piano Player, in 1952. And he doesn't like the fact that they pigeonholed him as a science fiction author. And I'm going to read you this because there's a lot of words up there. So the Piano Player is a dystopian novel. He's living in Schenectady. He's writing about, he's working in the GM plant, and he's writing about AI and automation taking over and displacing the workers, and what happens to civilization when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. These themes show up all the time. These are not new themes. So he wrote that, I have been a sore-headed occupant of a file drawer labeled science fiction ever since, and I would like out, particularly since so many serious critics regularly mistake that drawer for a tall white fixture in a comfort station. He's got a wit there. So the next paragraph, he picks on the word serious critics. The way a person gets into this drawer, apparently, is to notice technology. The feeling persists that no one can simultaneously be a respectable writer and understand how a refrigerator works, just as no gentleman wears a brown suit in the city. Colleges may be to blame. English majors are encouraged, I know, to hate chemistry and physics and to be proud because they are not dull and creepy and humorless and war-oriented like the engineers across the quad. And because English majors can scarcely sign their own names at the end of a course of English instruction, many become serious critics. I've already said what they do then to the drawer I'm in. Now, you may not feel quite that way about English majors and serious critics, but Vonnegut certainly did back in 1965. So is this exaggerated? Yeah. And perhaps it was more so then than it is today. But this attitude hasn't completely gone away. How many of you read the Sunday New York Times book review? Okay, 3 of us. And I particularly like the interview that they have on page 3 or 2 or whatever, one of those early pages. And quite often, there's a question that says something to the effect of, which genres do you especially enjoy reading and which do you avoid? And usually there's an anodyne answer. They get 20 books on their on their nightstand, and they're reading everything. But all too often, they say they don't read science fiction. I've seen that a number of times. Once a year or so, that'll show up as the answer. And that sort of pisses me off. Not that I'm a science fiction author, I'm a reader. And I want to think that there's some value in reading science fiction. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the reputation, as Vonnegut alluded to, and as many have written, is that it's a genre for adolescents and others who just have never grown up. That's space opera, okay? Actually, some of us like not having ever grown up. We like to explore things. Yeah, I see we've got some in the audience. But these same adolescents who've never grown up, who read science fiction, came up with a space program, and they drive our technology and our economy, and of course they came up with the nuclear bombs too. But there's a price for progress. So the English majors come back to the point that it's space opera, it's not current reality, it's all about gadgets. We'll get to gadgets later, that's why you're here. And it doesn't develop its characters, but there's a lot more to it than developing characters. Therefore, is it real literature? Some people say no. And critics, these serious critics that Vonnegut complained about in the mid-20th century, when Vonnegut wrote Player Piano, they noted that much science fiction literature was of low literary quality. And I think we can all agree with that. A lot of pulp fiction out there. Ted Sturgeon, science fiction author and a critic, countered this in 1951 by writing that 90% of all literature is crap. It's not just science fiction. This has a name now. It's called Sturgeon's Law. You can Google it. But similar sentiments have been said by Disraeli, Kipling, Orwell. This goes back 150 years. So there's nothing, and there wasn't much science fiction in 1870. So a lot of literature is just bad. And the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who's off the bottom of the screen here, in 2013, generalized Sturgeon's Law to say that 90% of everything is crap. So, what's the purpose of literature? Why do you read science fiction or watch science fiction? So serious literature, the ones the English majors like, it entertains and it examines the human condition, and it's based on or in reality as we know it. Good science fiction starts with those, at least the first two. It entertains, it does examine the human condition. There are generally human beings in these stories. I think iRobot may have some stories that don't have humans. But it also examines alternate but plausible reality. So it's a broader scope than serious literature. It deals with science and technology more than others. It broaches difficult philosophical issues. Now, some real serious literature that's not science fiction does this, but it's easier to do when you can step outside of reality and posit certain questions in different realities. And it looks ahead. Most serious literatures of the present day are looking back. And it asks the questions, what if something was different? What if this happened or that happened or did not happen? So it opens up a huge universe of possibilities for things to occur. So here's my very brief overview. These are some of the books that I assign to my students in my science fiction class. And they illustrate different things. These are the old ones. And I start with Cyrano de Bergerac, who you probably never knew wrote science fiction. How many of you knew he wrote science fiction? He wrote a book called L'Autre Monde. This predates the novel, so we can't really call it a novel. It's about 50 chapters, each one about 2 pages long. There's a good translation online. It was written about 1650, and he takes on the Parisian nobility. He takes on the church. He basically criticizes everything there is in Parisian society, And he didn't lose his head for two reasons. One, it wasn't published till 1920. He gave it to a friend to publish on his death, and his friend thought it should never be published. But also, it takes place on the moon. It doesn't take place in Paris. It's science fiction. And it's not like all of a sudden he wakes up and finds himself on the moon. He develops the ramjet, basically. How do you get from the Earth to the moon? Well, he noticed that dew rises in the morning when it gets hot, so he makes he puts dew in these bottles, and when the sun comes up, he floats. And he somehow gets to the moon that way. And he understands the Earth is rotating because his first attempt, he goes up and he comes down, and he's no longer in Paris, he's now in Canada. Then there's some adventures there. And he meets all sorts of biblical personnel up on the moon. There's a Garden of Eden up there and some really weird characters. So this is science fiction. It's not reality. I wouldn't call it plausible either, but it's still, you got to start someplace. Voltaire wrote about a giant from a planet orbiting the star Sirius and Micromegas. Jules Verne wrote about engineering technology. It's actually a fairly boring work unless you're interested in the technology, or if you want to see what the French thought about the Americans in 1865. Lots of barbs in there. The science is right, except for the fact that his method of propelling a rocket ship to the moon would have killed anybody involved in it. You may have, in high school, come across a book called Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott, writing as a square. This is a book on 2- and 3-dimensional geometry, but if you read it carefully, I'm told, because I don't understand some of this stuff, I'm not an English major, it's actually a takedown of the British upper class. So you have an innocuous book, it's teaching geometry to high school age kids, but it's really a social commentary. There are other social commentaries, like H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. It's not just a sort of a guy going to the future and finding that humanity bifurcates into two races and all that stuff. It's actually a social commentary about the British upper class and the lower class. Where the lower class, the Morlocks do all the work, and the Eloi, well, they're stupid, but they take the fruits of what the Morlocks do. You, of course, wrote War of the Worlds, too. Then I end my sort of old stuff with Olaf Stapleton's The Last and First Men, which is a classic, which means everybody talks about it and nobody ever reads it. I did read about 90% of it once. It's actually a good story. So more recently, the science fiction you're probably more acquainted with is the golden age, the era of Asimov, Clarke, and Bradbury, starting in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Very utopian, lots of pulp fiction, lots of really terrible literature, but some very good short stories came out of that age. And it's because, we had won World War I, we had invented the airplane, everything was looking on the up and up. Atomic power was coming into play. There was unlimited energy. The rocket had been invented. We could do anything. Very utopian at that time. That sort of went downhill later. The cyberpunk era, the dystopias sort of dominated later in the 70s for 30 or 40 years. This is the era of Philip K. Dick and William Gibson. Good literature, but not terribly optimistic. Good lessons, though, for us. These are cautionary tales. Things can get bad. Things can get worse. Think about what you're doing. A book, how many of you have you read Octavia Butler, The Parable of the Sower? You don't like that one?
I don't like her at all.
Oh. That is the scariest book I have ever read, The Parable of the Sower. It's dystopian, it's It was written in 1990. It takes place in Los Angeles in 2022. So it's history now. It's a history that hasn't happened yet. But it's basically a world ravaged by climate change. There's the rich people are living in walled communities. The poor people are fending for themselves wherever they can, and she is determined to survive. And there is a Christian nationalist in the White House. That's what makes it scary. And she goes off to invent a religion and things like that. But I recommend this to any of you who are interested in seeing just how prescient or how scary a work of speculative fiction can be. Ministry for the Future takes place a few decades from now, perhaps. The world's 20 degrees hotter than it is now. And he's a classic science fiction guy. And a book that I only discovered about a year ago, George R. Stewart, Earth Abides, written in 1949. The ultimate plague hits the planet, and basically all of humanity dies, and humanity gets to start over from scratch. How would humanity start over from scratch if you've got a few people here, a few people there? Your technology all breaks down. We forget how to manufacture things. It's a well-written book because George R. Stewart was an English professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and I don't know that that's why it's a well-written book, but it certainly helped. But that's a book that I think everybody should read. It sort of started one of the books that started the environmental movement. So tides change. They go in, they come out, they go out, whatever. Anyways, we're now in the solar punk era, which is sort of an answer to the cyberpunk era where people are talking about, well, how are we going to heal the planet? How are we going to use science and technology to heal the planet? I haven't read a lot of these, but apparently this is the next big thing. It's utopian to a certain extent. Okay, so that's my history of science fiction and what you should or should not read. You should read everything. Let's see. So, what you're here for, though, is to find out about what's in these science fiction books. The science. I'm supposed to be able to talk about the science in science fiction. Although I find the fiction much more interesting, usually. So I'm going to pick on 4 gimmicks that you will find in science fiction books. The first is faster than light travel, superluminal velocities. Can't do it. However, you need to do it because space is big. You can't get there from here using our known physics. So you have to come up with something. Now, physicists have thought about this, and yes, there is such a thing as a warp drive. A French physicist came up with this. And you get around the limitations of relativity, which says you can't go faster than the speed of light, by realizing that you cannot go faster than the speed of light in space. But space itself can expand faster than the speed of light. It is expanding faster than the speed of light. So all you need to do is set up a wave and then surf on it. And you can go as fast as you want. It takes a lot of energy, though. In fact, it takes more energy than there is in the universe to warp space to let you go faster than the speed of light. So it seems somewhat selfish if you were to do that. But this is one of those things that's not completely implausible. Well, it is completely implausible, but it's not ruled out by physics. Okay, you just need an infinite amount of energy. So I will allow science fiction authors to use faster than light travel if they're doing space opera, if they're going to other planets, if they need it. Fine, you can have it. I do draw the line at time travel, though. We are all traveling in time. We are going forward at 1 second per second, and there's no way to turn that off. And you can go faster than that, or make everybody else go faster while you go slower. So you can, in a sense, go forward in time by taking advantage of special relativity and general relativity. If you move very, very fast, everybody around you age less rapidly than everybody around you that's not moving fast. Or if you find yourself in a deep gravitational well, like orbiting a black hole, time slows down for you too. Your problem then is to get away from the black hole. Your problem always is to come back to where you started from in special relativity. So you can always go forward, but you cannot go backwards. And if any of you are interested in the paradoxes involved in time travel to the past, I highly recommend Larry Niven's essay, it's not fiction, essay called The Theory and Practice of Time Travel. This has been published in a couple of his compendia of short stories. He is an astrophysicist by training, but he found writing was much more lucrative. But he knows what he's talking about. And he's humorous too. So I strongly recommend that if you can find it. Aliens. Aliens are another gimmick. We're not aware of any intelligent aliens in the universe. It is highly likely that there is life elsewhere in the universe. The building blocks of life have been recently found on the 2 asteroids we brought samples back from. There is strong evidence that the same building blocks are on Mars. To go from the building blocks to an intelligent alien is a big leap, but to go from the building blocks to something like a bacterium is not so big a stretch. So one of the other courses I teach is called The Search for Life in the Universe. So I probably know much more biochemistry than is good for me. But it's quite likely that there's a lot of life in the universe. It's just a biological, chemical process. It happens. Whether they become intelligent, it took 4.5 billion years on this planet for humanity to show up. Now you can argue that there's been intelligence on the planet before us, not intelligence that lets you. No, dinosaurs some may have been smart, but they can't build things. Birds are intelligent. There's some other mammals that are intelligent, but they haven't made the same kind of mark on the planet that we have. Now, I don't want to get off onto ecological, environmental type stuff here, but it's taken 4.5 billion years to get to us. Could it go faster? Probably. Could it go more slowly? Certainly. So intelligent aliens, well, they're going to have the same trouble getting here as we would have getting to see them. So they're off on their own planets, and they're probably going to stay there for the foreseeable future. They will most likely not be at our technological level when we find them. They go or probably 99% of all science fiction books involving aliens ever written, because we have been technologically adept for like 150 years. Think of where we will be if we don't destroy ourselves in the meantime in another 150 years. You've got the galaxy is 10 billion years old. The odds of finding another culture, another civilization out there that is exactly 150 years into technology is 0. The probability is 0 because they could have started any time. So aliens are either going to be much more advanced or much less advanced, but not the same as us. So say goodbye to the Vulcans and the Klingons. And they will not look like us. They will not be bipedal. They will not be anthropomorphic bipeds. They will not look like giant cockroaches. There are a lot of weird-looking critters on this planet. They don't, they don't all look like us. Though their internal mechanisms may be very, very similar. But aliens are going to be even weirder than we can imagine. Any alien you can imagine, you can write about on paper, you can draw put together in film, is going to be much, much tamer looking than what's really out there. You can bet on that. Nature does weird things. But I will also add that this comes from from biochemistry, that if they do come here to visit us, they are not going to want to eat us or take our women. They did movies about this in the 50s, and probably books too. So our biochemistries are probably completely incompatible. We'll use different amino acids, so we won't taste good. Okay, and then another gimmick is to use an alternate universe. You think our universe is dull and boring and confining? Make up another one. There are 3 books listed here that do just this. They start on our planet and you discover another universe. Now, they could exist. There are theories of multiverses. There are other universes, and the 2 universes can't talk to each other. But you can create something called an Einstein-Rosen bridge that can bridge the gap between 2 universes somehow and peer into it, or maybe even travel into it. Well, that's really pretty implausible, but you can get some good science fiction out of it. Greg Benford's Cosm actually takes place at Brookhaven National Lab, where they're using the Rick accelerator and inadvertently create an opening to a new universe. Asimov had a universe of aliens that are trying to take all the energy out of our universe, and Einstein's bridge is a high energy physics story. It's not science. It's not astronomically oriented science fiction. It's high energy physics oriented science fiction, which is rare, but it's out there. Okay, so those are 4 gimmicks. There are other kinds of gimmicks you can think of that authors use to make their stories work. Then there are the gadgets. Gadgets are, I'm defining as being smaller things in your plot. A robot is a gadget. Androids and AI are gadgets. But these are not new. Leonardo da Vinci actually built a working robot in 1495. Now, by working, it means that somebody could pull strings and could move its arms and things like that. But it was a humanoid robot. Okay, the Japanese are very good at building humanoid robots these days. Isaac Asimov explored robots back in the 50s, and you've probably all read I, Robot, or at least seen the movie. The book is better. And if philosophers have looked at the 3 laws of robotics and concluded they don't work. Now, the whole point of iRobot is it's a series of logic puzzles showing how things go wrong. These are cautionary tales that folks who are inventing AI either haven't read or have completely forgotten. Things can and do go wrong. Perhaps the most interesting gadget that has come out of science fiction did not come out of science fiction. It came out of the Dick Tracy comic strip in 1946. Dick Tracy's 2-way wrist radio. There's quite a resemblance to the Apple Watch. Ray guns and portable lasers and phasers and whatever else you want. Weapons are necessary for space opera. And guns don't work. You have to use rays of some sort. Computers, they got science fiction authors are terrible prognosticators. They got computers all wrong. In the 1930s, didn't have computers. You jumped in your spaceship and you did everything manually. They must have been much simpler to operate back then. Isaac Asimov wrote about computers. He wrote a book called The Lost Question, and he gives sort of a future history of computing. And computers back in the 1940s were the size of this room, full of vacuum tubes. Well, Asimov moved it ahead decade, by century, by millennium, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger with time. I think they still use vacuum tubes because they didn't recognize, he didn't invent or conceive of the transistor and solid-state electronics. But you have computers that are the sizes of planets, and when that got too small, they figured out how to put your computer in hyperspace, which is another gimmick that science fiction writers like to use, hyperspace. But nobody envisioned Moore's law. Nobody envisioned computers getting smaller with time. So they just missed it. But nowadays that you know that computers are getting smaller and faster, if you write a book in 2026, your computers are going to be more or less up to date for 2026. But I don't know how small they're willing to go as they envision the future. And there's the genetic engineering and cyborgs, which are different than androids. Reality is catching up. We got a lot of people on this planet with artificial parts. Maybe some of you. Nancy Kress wrote a very nice novella called Beggars in Spain, which talks about, what happens if you figure out a way to make people smarter? Well, one way she comes up with is, or that these scientists in her story come up with is, you take away the need to sleep. And if you don't have to sleep, you can work an extra 8 hours a day. Now, apparently our president only sleeps 3 or 4 hours a day, and there are unintended consequences of not sleeping. And other unintended consequences show up in Nancy Kress's novella. And you can do interesting things with artificial parts. Alistair Reynolds, who was an astrophysicist, has written a number of books that take place in the distant future, where people and machines are melded together. And I find them interesting, fascinating that somebody can dream up these situations. We're going there. Reality is catching up. So what is good science fiction? Well, in my estimation, as a college professor, so you can take that for what it's worth. Good science fiction is actually educational. Fiction is a good way to teach things surreptitiously. And there are an awful lot of well-written, well-focused short stories that teach things. And here's just 4 that I've written down. Asimov's Nightfall teaches you all about celestial mechanics. Clarke's The Star, a lot of philosophical issues and science versus religion issues. But if you read it, you learn what's a supernova and how does it affect planets orbiting the supernova. Godwin's The Cold Equations is a cautionary tale for engineers. It tells you never build a spaceship with zero margin for error, because things will always go wrong. But it's a story that depends on understanding the concept of energy and momentum. And Larry Niven, as an astrophysicist, wrote a number of books that focus in on science things. Neutron Stars is all about tides. And you'll learn something about neutron stars too. But where do tides come from? Inconstant Moon talks about solar flares. It starts out as a lost man on Earth scenario, but then they realize that, no, the sun didn't explode, it just flared. And then the weather's going to get really, really weird. And 3 novels here that are very much science-based. Dragon's Egg is about life on a neutron star. Now, can life get going on a neutron star? Well, what Forward posits is that it's atomic-based rather than chemical-based. It's physical-based rather than atomic. So that rather than having chemicals, you have atomic nuclei, basically. And somehow it comes alive. The time scales are much, much faster than biological time scales, by like 8 orders of magnitude. So make one visit to this neutron star, you discover this life there, you come back a day later, they've now advanced a million years beyond you. That's an interesting concept. Haldeman's Forever War does a great job with time dilation and relativity, also broaches changes in civilization over time, and it's an anti-war story. It's a war story that's anti-war. How many of you have read Forever War? Too few of you. But I strongly recommend that. And a book that I hesitate to call good science fiction because it's one of the worst written books I've ever read. It's called The Unincorporated Man by Colin and Colin. But it's real science fiction in that it starts in our current reality. It posits what's going to happen over the next few hundred years. A guy dying of terminal cancer freezes himself, wakes up a couple hundred years in the future, and society has completely changed. They've turned the Roberts Court on its head. Every person is a corporation. This is a completely different political structure. When you're born, your parents own 50% of you, the government owns a certain amount for tax purposes, and you own a little bit. And then you want to get an education, you sell part of yourself to somebody, and they pay for your education. And basically, it's indentured servitude. But they don't realize that it's bad, except for the one guy who's unincorporated because he was born before the Articles of Incorporation were adopted. And it gets into social media 20 years before social media was a thing. They really don't like virtual reality. But it's terrible literature in that the villains are bad, 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 and the good guys are good, good, good. And there's really, things happen, but it's hard to see much of a coherent plot. But the thinking is what's important. The ideas are what's important in a novel like this. It's certainly thought-provoking. So good science fiction is forward-looking, and it anticipates unintended consequences. This is what does not happen in serious literature. This is where science fiction has a role to play. Thinking ahead, what might happen if you do something? What might happen if you dump a whole bunch of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? That's what Kim Stanley Robinson wrote about in Ministry for the Future. Of course, he knew we were dumping it in, so it's not a great leap of faith. It's not like he wrote it in 1850. But examples of unintended consequences are, I, Robot, it's 9 short stories, 9 logic problems. What can go wrong? And something goes wrong in every single one. Butler stories, there's a lot that goes wrong with the environment and with the government. Foreigner, C.J. Cherry's series, it's about 24 books now. I'm up to number 5. I don't know if I'll ever finish them. What happens when you meet an alien civilization on their terms, you're on their planet, and they think very different than you? How do you communicate with an intelligent alien species that doesn't think the way you do, doesn't have the same emotional concepts? How do you work together? It's slow, it's involved, but I find it fascinating. A Canticle for Leibowitz, a classic from the 50s, Consequences of Nuclear War, Science versus Religion. If you wipe yourself out, will you come back? How long will it take? And then what's going to happen when you develop nuclear weapons all over again? Does history repeat itself? And The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. Has anybody read that one? One, okay. It's a very different take on first encounter with aliens. For one thing, the Jesuits are doing the first encounter because the Vatican has money and they can build a spaceship. But it's well, I'll just leave it at that. If you're interested in theological ponderings, philosophical ponderings about what happens when you meet an intelligent, there are actually 2 intelligent civilizations, and one are predators and one is prey, which does not happen on our planet, but it happens on this other planet. So you can explore things in science fiction that don't really happen. And good science fiction does explore big pictures. We have a whole universe to deal with. You've probably all heard of at least the Foundation trilogy. Asimov wrote back in the 50s. I reread it a couple of years ago. It's boring, but it's a classic. But you're looking at civilizations on the scale of the galaxy. And again, Butler, I have up there, and Foreigner is up there. And the unincorporated man, what's happening with how does civilization evolve? And the time machine, too. You go 800,000 years into the future, and humanity is bifurcated into the Morlocks and the Eloi. So some of this good stuff asks interesting philosophical questions. Among them, there's the science versus religion that shows up in a lot of these things, economic systems and politics. Though what I forgot to put into this slide was in the economic systems and politics is Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which is becoming more interesting now. We're trying to figure out, well, who should be a citizen and who shouldn't. So all of these issues that come up in contemporary politics, almost all, were written about 50 years ago by science fiction authors, because some people think ahead, some people dream. I want to end, that means I've got 3 more slides, I think. But how many of you have read the Martian Chronicles? Well, this is a science fiction club. You must have read the Martian Chronicles. You saw a couple of quotes from Ray Bradbury earlier. He is lumped in with the classic science fiction authors, but he always claimed he was not an author of science fiction. He wrote horror and fantasy. There's a fine line sometimes between science fiction and horror. Especially if you're looking into the unknown, you're going out into space. Who knows what evil lurks out there? So even though the Martian Chronicles is considered a classic of science fiction, there's no science in it. But it has all the tropes that show up in all the other science fiction books ever written, just about. You've got aliens. They're the Martians. It's all about colonization, people trying to convert the Martians, killing them off inadvertently. It's a couple of lost men on your whatever planet you want stories. There's nuclear war, there are pandemics, there's robots, rockets, space travel, telepathy, time travel, terraforming. Almost any trope that you find in science fiction stories is in the Martian Chronicles. So it's a good guide. You want to know, you need an idea, something to write about, pick up the Martian Chronicles and find a chapter and see if you can expand upon it. But it's not science fiction, remember that. We talked about gadgets. Science fiction authors are terrible prognosticators. They've gotten almost everything wrong. Another Ray Bradbury quote, people ask me to predict the future when all I want to do is prevent it. Better yet, build it. See, it's a cautionary tale. This is what could go wrong if you keep doing what you're doing. And any near-term predictions are really risky. If you're an author, do you want to predict something is going to happen in 5 years and then still be alive in 5 years and find out that it didn't happen? It's risky to make near-term predictions. So anyways, here's a synopsis. Science fiction is not just idle speculations or adolescent fantasies. We all like science fiction because we get something out of it. There are the many worlds of science fiction. There are many authors, many different worlds, many scenarios. They're just a series of possible alternatives for the future, alternate futures. We're going to pick one of them. Let's pick the right one. So why read it? Maybe reality is just too confining, but novel ideas are stimulating and they can be dangerous. So you might learn something, you might be challenged to consider these what ifs, you might want to escape this reality, or what's hidden behind the dark star. My last comment is, it may be fun. I will entertain questions, comments. I will not tell you what my favorite book is.
So you don't consider Star Trek science-based?
Parts of it are. Well,
I mean, I agree with
it's
you,
much
Star
more
Wars.
science-based than, say, Star Wars.
Yeah.
I've been watching it late night lately. It's so dated now.
I know.
But yeah, in 1967, it was very forward-looking. A lot of good social commentary.
Yeah.
Very good social commentary. In terms of the science, you've got your spaceship, and you've got your phasers, and you can teleport, which is another gimmick you could put in here. But what's the new science?
Work for it.
Maybe. I like science. I like Star Trek. So, at least I like the original series.
Yeah.
And the Next Generation isn't too bad here. Yes.
What do you think of Hail Mary?
I like the book. I haven't seen the movie.
Movie's good. Movie's good.
It's less plausible than The Martian, for example, which we did a good job on.
Could you elaborate on the Martian Chronicles? You said it has also concepts of science fiction, but it is not science fiction, and I did not quite understand that. Could you elaborate?
Well, Bradbury himself said this is not science fiction. So Bradbury never considered this science fiction. And if you read it carefully, there's a lot of wonderful commentary. And he makes use of things like time travel, which I don't like, rockets, space travel, nuclear war, pandemics. He makes use of all of these things that show up in science fiction stories, but there's really no science involved. There's no real gadgets except that the Martians have a gun that shoots bees. I don't know that humanity has invented that yet, but they sting. That's what bees do. But he's really looking. It's a thinly. Let's see. How should I put this? It's a commentary on colonization. We're taking over a planet. What are all the things we're doing wrong? Well, for one thing, you kill off the Martians. Okay. Then you kill off yourselves in the process. Very briefly. So the definition of science fiction is quite hazy. So it's good speculative fiction because it does ask interesting questions.
We have a few questions from the folks at home. One question is, what is your least favorite story?
Well, this is because I said I won't tell you what my favorite story is. I tend to forget the ones that I can't finish. I do, novels, they're hard to compare. In terms of short stories, I think the one that's made the most impression on me is Arthur Clarke's The Star, because it's 8 pages long, and it conveys an awful lot of important questions. Asks important questions, conveys some important facts. But novels, it's harder to do.
We have another question from the folks at home. Did you see the TV version of Earth Abides? And if so, what did you think?
I did not see it, so I don't think about it. I know it was on TV because the book cover says it was on AMC or something. But the book is highly recommended.
So, I'm not a huge science fiction reader, but I've read some stuff and I've seen movies. But so you come up this theme of, which came out in 2001, Space Odyssey, and then several of the books and movies, including Terminator. The idea that ultimately machines and computers advance to the point where they become sentient, I guess is the word that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Self-aware, whatever term, yeah. So, and everything I'm reading about AI would seem to suggest, at least some people, including the people who created it or giving credit for it, seem to think it's only a matter of time before we get to that point. And what scares me is that if that's a year from now or 10 years from now, it almost doesn't matter, right? If we get there, what logically would prevent, or why would a sentient being not want to ensure its own existence and survival by taking over, which would, that might be a far superior position mentally than its masters. Why wouldn't that, I can't think of a good reason why it wouldn't come to pass, whether it's 10 years from now or 100 years from now.
It's a valid fear. I could talk for a long time about 2001, the movie, but I decided not to talk about movies. The computer there, HAL. Was HAL sentient? Was that an AI?
That's a good question.
Yes.
They don't really tell you because this was 1967, and nobody worried much about things, questions like that. But clearly, Hal goes insane, let's say, which means he must have been intelligent, because he realizes that he's got conflicting programming instructions and he can't figure out what to do. So he ends up killing everybody to protect the mission. So, yeah. Science fiction is a cautionary tale. Nobody knows what sentience is. What's consciousness? When do animals and human beings become conscious? Is it the number of connections between neurons? You've got about 10 to the 13th neurons in your head, and I don't know that Claude or whatever Claude's successor is has anywhere close to that. It ingests a lot of information. But the scary thing is we don't know how it, quote unquote, thinks. We've dealt with machine learning algorithms for decades now. We sort of understand how machine learning works. It's pattern recognition. All a large language model is probabilistic matching of phrases, what word comes next in a sequence, based on everything it's ingested, based on all the crap that it's read on X and Twitter. And there was what we used to say back in the 70s was garbage in, garbage out. There are stories about AI programs trying to protect themselves, to preserve themselves, to protect themselves from being shut down. That's scary. You should always make sure that you can unplug it.
We have some questions from the folks at home. One is just a comment. Thank you for pointing out that Bradbury's Martian Chronicles is not science fiction. You have validated a decade-long conflict I had in middle school. And we have another question. In teaching the sci-fi class at Stony Brook, what story or work seems to most impress the students?
What most impresses them? The students all have different backgrounds, so different stories impress them in different ways. Some of them like Dune, which I've always found to be a dense, tough read, but it's got a valid message. It's an ecological, environmental novel. They prefer movies, which I show The Day the Earth Stood Still, the first day, because there's nothing to discuss. They haven't read anything yet. And that's from 1951, I believe, or 54. And alien spaceship lands on Earth, and there's a robot, and they tell you, hey, behave yourselves, or we're going to wipe you out of the universe. But you learned about social mores in the 1950s more than science. You learn that a robot can melt a gun with a laser beam coming out of its eye. Well, so what? But you learn that times were different back in 1954. And man, it has some good messages. The The second story, the second week, we read Forever War because it's a fairly quick read. There's a good science in it. And I've had students refuse to read Parable of the Talents because they don't like the fact that it has rape in it, for one thing. You know, the Christian nationalists are taking over and they don't respect women. So they will not read that book. I can respect that. So, yeah.
I comment, sorry about that. I commented earlier about dislike of Octavia Butler, and I just like to preface that. At any rate, she has very many ideas that I think are great, but she has the most pessimistic viewpoint on humanity that I've ever read. That's it.
There are a number of dystopian authors. I would put William Gibson up there, too. Yeah, she's not... Well, if you read through to the end of the second book, it becomes a little bit more optimistic. It was supposed to be a trilogy, but she died before she could write the third book. But it's a literature of ideas. And as you said, she does have good ideas. She has provocative ideas.
We have a question from at home. Do you know of any sci-fi author who was an actual scientist? And would such an author write the best books in your opinion?
There are quite a few of them. Larry Niven was an astrophysicist. Isaac Asimov has a PhD in biochemistry. He was a professor at Boston University for a while. There are, if I had my notes with me, I could give you another dozen names. So there are some who are not particularly good authors, but there are some who are and have good ideas. Fred Hoyle wrote The Black Cloud. That's a classic from the 1950s. He was a world-class cosmologist. He didn't believe in the Big Bang. He believed in the steady state, so he was wrong. But he wrote science fiction. So yeah, scientists do this.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Walter for presenting this wonderful presentation and giving us some enlightenment on the science behind science fiction. And I'd also like to thank the Hamptons Observatory for their partnership and their wonderful presentations over the years. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight and the folks at home. And we'll see you on the next one.